good. First glimmer of hope in the book of Ruth is in verse 6, where we find that the Lord, Yahweh, has provided food for his people in Bethlehem. So we know that behind the scenes of Naomi's bitterness, God is great and God is good. And we see this one promise from the start of the book. Mark it down, Ruth chapter 1. In God's sovereign design, he ordains sorrowful tragedy to set the stage for surprising triumph. There are times when we think God is far from us. In this story, every one of our lives, we're surrounded by famine, when we long for what we don't have, what we know we need, when everything seems foreign. Maybe you find yourself in a new place, physically, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, and you're not sure how you got there, but it's not what you planned. When death strikes and the pain just won't seem to go away. Maybe it was a short time ago, maybe a long time ago. Maybe it was expected, maybe it wasn't. When despair sinks in, we're not sure if we can go on in our current circumstances. You feel like sometimes there's no way out. Amidst loneliness, when no one else, even those who love you, really seem to understand. Maybe it feels like there's not even anyone who is there to love you. Amidst barrenness, the pain I know that many couples struggle with, wanting children, desiring children, wanting a family, and struggling to understand why you have that kind of deep desire for a child and God's not answering it. In our grief, when we hurt, when we cry, when we wrestle, in our shame, when the things we struggle with may not be proud of. There might be things you're struggling with that either people don't understand or maybe they even look down upon, and all those things. I don't want to be overly depressing here, but these things are real. When we get the diagnosis from the doctor, or we sign the papers ending a marriage, or we hear the news in our family, or when our job is gone, or the house is taken away, or the bottom line can't be met anymore, whatever it is, and we wonder, is God really near in all of this? This is where we must realize that even when we think God is farthest from us, here is the promise. God will show himself faithful to us. There's a delicate touch of hope at the end of this chapter, verse 22. Naomi and the Moabites came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. And Naomi has no idea what that's about to mean. She's saying, I'm empty, but here's the reality. Standing next to her in the person of Ruth is fullness from God. And God is about to weave together the story of all stories to show his gracious and unfathomable blessing toward Naomi. And he's going to do it through Ruth, the Moabitess. Don't miss this, brother or sister. When God seems farthest from you, he actually may be laying the foundations for the greatest display of his faithfulness to you. This is why we named our daughter, whom we adopted from China a couple months ago, Mara Ruth. This is Heather and I's story, waiting for children for years, God not providing the way we wanted, wondering why not. Who knew that God, in withholding a child from us, was setting the stage for our first son to be from Kazakhstan, then our second son, and now our daughter from China. I look around my table and I see the blessing of God in a way I never could have imagined 8 years ago in the middle of hurt and pain and tearful nights with my wife. And it's our little girl's story, abandoned at birth, left outside the gate of an orphanage in a brown paper box. What looked like tragedy, God was setting the stage for surprising triumph, to bring her into a family, to love her and care for her and point her to the fatherless on high. So, back to Ruth, stage set for the Redeemer to come on the scene in chapter 2, the portrait of a kinsman Redeemer. One morning, Ruth goes out in search of food. She just happens to get in the field of Boaz. The knight in shining armor enters the scene. She starts to glean with other beggars in the field, and as she's doing that, Ruth 2 says, Boaz walks up at that moment. Now, guys, I don't know if you've ever watched a romantic movie with your wife, one of those love stories, the things start happening that are so unrealistic, they're coming together, and you're thinking, this is absurd, life never happens this way, and right when you're about to say something sarcastic, you look over at your wife next to you, and she's in tears, she's engrossed in the romance, and you think, you're buying this? I mean, give me a break. That's never happened to me. I've just heard from other guys that that's happened. So, when you come to Ruth 2, you see the sovereign hand of God directing this man to this woman. He walks on the scene and says, who is that? That's Hebrew for check her out. And as Boaz finds out who she is, that she has no family to take care of her, he starts to seek her as her own family. He seeks the outcast as his family. He tells her to stay in his field, glean there as much as she'll be safe in his care. He shelters the weak under his wings. And then in a wonderful scene, he serves the hungry at his table. He serves the hungry. Boaz invites Ruth to sit with his guests for a meal. And the romance is just dripping here. Come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied. It's good. And then he showers the needy with his grace. Just trying to make it interesting for those who did Secret Church of the date night tonight. So making sure she goes home with as much as possible. She's literally covered with food for weeks. Now, when she gets back, Naomi finds out whose field Ruth's been in chapter 2, and she's ecstatic. She knows that Boaz is the kinsman redeemer. I've used that language. What is the kinsman redeemer? God had set up a law where kinsman would take care of his relative's family if something happened to that relative. If somebody died, and the next kinsman could redeem, purchase, acquire everything that belonged to that person, including their family. Part of the purpose was to make sure the family was cared for. And Naomi knows that Ruth has just been treated to a feast with a kinsman redeemer. So she goes from bitterness to blessedness real quick. Could it be that in your sorrow and in your suffering, God is actually plotting for your satisfaction? So Naomi springs into action in chapter 3, becomes a matchmaker, tries to set Ruth and Boaz up. Long story short, after a shady night on the threshing floor in Ruth chapter 3, it is discovered that there is one kinsman who is closer than Boaz who has the right to redeem. So we get to the price of a kinsman redeemer. In order for a kinsman redeemer to redeem family or property, he had to have three things. One, he must have the right to redeem, must be a near relative. Two, he must have the resources to redeem, able to pay the price. And third, he must have the resolve to redeem. So in chapter 4, Boaz confronts this other dude. He doesn't have the resolve to redeem Naomi and Ruth. So in chapter 4, 9, and 10, Boaz buys everything that belongs to Elimelech, and as part of this, he brings Ruth the Moabite to be his wife. They get married, and they have a son named Obed, which brings to the resolution of the whole story. Let me show you Obed in redemptive history. You read Ruth chapter 4. Boaz took Ruth, she became his wife. He went to her, the Lord gave her conception, she bore a son. The women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nurserer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you has more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez and all the way down to David. See the picture here. God brings his people from death to life. Book of Ruth opens with 3 funerals. It closes with a wedding and a baby. Death has given way to life in the hands of the Almighty. God brings his people from curse to blessing. Chapter 1, Naomi has the curse of all curses, a widow with no heir. Chapter 4, she's holding the heir in her hands as the women call out blessing on her. God brings his people from bitterness to happiness. Can't you just see the smile on Naomi's face here? She looks down at Obed. Don't call me bitter anymore. Call me blessed. He brings his people from emptiness to fullness. At the end of chapter 1, Naomi opens her hands to the women of Bethlehem and says, "I have nothing." At the end of chapter 4, she folds up her arms around a precious little baby as the women of Bethlehem say, "You have everything." And God brings his people from despair to hope. And the book of Ruth ends not with looking back to an unbearable past, but looking forward to an unbelievable future. And this is where we're reminded of that this story doesn't end in Ruth chapter 4. Fast forward me to Matthew chapter 1. Next time Ruth and Boaz are in the Bible. Matthew 1:6, Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David the king, leading 10 verses later to Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ. The story of Ruth is ultimately pointing us to Jesus in redemptive history. He is our Redeemer. He alone is able to pay the price for our salvation. He alone is able to guarantee the promise of our restoration. In him we have redemption through his blood. So we come to these conclusions. 1, God is committed to sovereignly providing for his people. He is the Almighty, Ruth chapter 1, who is sovereign over everything. Don't lose sight of the fact that he is sovereign. He is sovereign over every setback. Famine, death, food, family, months of waiting, nervous night, near kinsman, childless womb. God's sovereign over it all. And he is sovereign over all suffering. We may not understand why. We may not understand how the things will ever change. We may see little to no hope on the horizon, but know this, in every setback we face, God is ultimately plotting for our good. So that we know, even when we cannot understand his manner, we can always trust his mercy. His path to our joy is not always smooth. His path to our joy is not always straight. But ladies and gentlemen, his path to our joy is always satisfying. I put here a hymn from William Cowper. Long story short, Cowper came to know Christ in an insane asylum. He suffered through bouts with deep depression in all of his life. When he came to Christ, he discovered that amidst darkness in life, when he faced clouds of trial and difficulty, he discovered those same storm clouds in the end rained down showers of mercy and grace. So he wrote this hymn called "God Moves in Mysterious Way, His Wonders to Perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Deep and unfathomable minds of never-failing skill, he treasures up his bright designs and works his sovereign will. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence, he hides a smiling face. His purpose will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain. Ruth, the sovereign